Hey there everyone, do without wilt shall be the whole of the law. I'm Lexi Eve, and today we're going to continue with the Liber series. We're in Magic in Theory and Practice, Chapter 3, the Formula of Tetragrammaton. The opening subtitle reads, quote, Yod He Vav He, the ineffable name, Jehovah, of the Hebrews. The four letters refer respectively to the four elements, fire, water, air, earth, in the order named, end quote. So I think a quick overview is in order. These letters are used in innumerable ways when one practices the Hermetic Kabbalah. Together, they are one of the most common names of God in the Hebrew Torah. It is a name considered to be so holy by the Jews that many of them consider it forbidden to speak out loud. They will often replace the name Yehovah with Adonai, the Lord, or Hashem, meaning simply the name. Some even just pause as they see the name. Most go so far as to believe that if they utter the name, the world will quake, or that by saying the correct version of the name, one will gain power over the universe. But this is in exoteric schools. In esoterica, we use the name often, though many times, such as in the LBRP, the magician who vibrates the name will instead intone the four letters, Yod He Vav He, instead of saying Yehovah. Most of what follows I've said in previous videos, but I will recap quickly, and then definitely go into new territory. Keep these basics in mind as we expand on each letter based on what Crowley writes in this chapter. These four letters in the Hermetic Kabbalah, first and foremost, signify the four Hermetic elements, Yod being fire, He being water, Vav being air, and He final being earth. They fit on the tree of life with Yod in Chakma, He in Bina, Vav in the next six spheres below the abyss, and He final in Malkuth, to signify the mother, father, son, and daughter, which I'll talk about in a moment. Each letter then also corresponds with the four worlds, Yod, Atziluth, being attributed to the supernal triad, He, Bria, being attributed to the next solar triad, which is Chesed, Gebor, and Tifereth, Vav, Yetzirah, being the lunar triad, Netzach, Hod, and Yesod, and He final, Asaya, being the final sphere, Malkuth. Each of these four worlds gets their own tree of life, one on top of the next like a huge ladder. And each Sephiroth of each of these four worlds has a tree of life within, giving a total of 400 Sephiroth, 400 being the value of Tav, the final letter of the Hebrew alphabet, signifying earth and thus completion. Yod He Vav He equates to 26, giving a few interesting words. Daleth, Beth, Kaf, which means to join together. Kaf, Beth, Daleth, to be heavy or a multitude. And Kaf, Daleth, Beth, to lie or deceive. Also the value of the Sephiroth of the middle pillar, Malkuth 10, Yesod 9, Tifereth 6, and Kether 1, equals 26. Yod He Vav He is four letters. Sigma, 1 to 4, or the summation of 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 equals 10. Malkuth is contained in the name, and you may have seen the Tetractys pyramid made of the letters thus. Pythagorean numerology, 10 was the perfect number, so in a way, Yod He Vav He signifies the unity of the 10 Sephiroth. Yod He Vav He is also associated with the abyss in the Hermetic order of the Golden Dawn. As it was said in the Supernal Eden, it barred the supernal triad from the lower Sephiroth, first by the flaming sword and then by Yod He Vav He, which is plastered across the abyss itself. Thus, it is in a way the demiurge, and not God, merely another false demon to be overcome in the path of initiation. Finally, let me give the opening line of this chapter, as it is important and I feel needs explaining. Quote, the climax of the formula is in one sense before even the formulation of the Yod, for the Yod is the most divine aspect of the force. The remaining letters are but a solidification of the same thing. End quote. All Hebrew characters are composed of the letter Yod permutated. Yod is the seed in more ways than one then. Yes, it is the seed of God. We'll look at any character in the Hebrew alphabet, and they all appear very fiery and have the flame-like point of the very small letter Yod. Yod of Tetragrammaton is seated in Atziluth, the highest of the four worlds. This implies that beyond the highest world, there is still the divine light, the penultimate emanation of God, Ein Sof. Just like in the opening of the Torah, quote, Bereshith bara Elohim ath, end quote, there is an insinuation that something unspeakable created the Elohim and the ether. For literal translation, here are the 4 words that translate as, in the beginning created the Elohim and the essence. So, it is like there is a pause before in the beginning, and this pause is God, Ein Sof, the totally unspeakable, unknowable, creating source of the universe. So it would be like, pause, this thing, in the beginning created the Elohim and the essence. So, before Yod and Atziluth, there is the divine light, the Ein Sof, represented by that which is beyond Keter, and then goes on to create all else. We see this represented in the Hebrew letters of Tetragrammaton, for Yod, being fire, goes on to be the root appearance of the other 3 letters. But don't think for a second that Yod, He, Vav, He are not in absolute union. We can look at each letter by itself, organize thoughts to attach to each one, segment them to portions of an invocation. But, like the entirety of one invocation, it is a single unified thing, just as the whole of the great work is one thing and must be used and thought of as such. Much more can be said, but this is enough to give one to meditate on for a good long while. This chapter is relatively short, and we are now going to examine Yod He Vav He as a device used for invocation. We begin again with Yod, quote, the formulation of the first creative force, of that Father who is called self-begotten, and unto whom it is said, Thou hast formulated thy father, and made fertile thy mother, end quote. The adding of the He to the Yod is the marriage of the father to the great co-equal mother, who is a reflection of Nuit as he is of Hadid. The marriage of the Yod and He create the offspring, the son, Vav, and the daughter, He. These 2 must now redeem their descent by coming into union and raising themselves up to the places of the father and mother. The son is the HGA, and the He the neophyte. Also in this is the 4 suits of the tarot, and of course the 4 court cards. These 4 letters, elements, worlds, etc., also represent 4 phases of initiation which the magician performing the great work must come through. They are even symbolized in Liber chapter 3, verses 64 to 67, even though these verses analogize the reading of the book of the law after you go through the 4 ordeals of initiation. But I find that they're apt and fitting to initiation all the same. So, quote, let him come through the first ordeal, and it will be to him as silver, through the second gold, through the third stones of precious water, through the 4th ultimate sparks of the intimate fire, end quote. So you could see silver being the lower feminine, Malkuth, gold being the lower masculine, Yetzirah, then water being Bria, fire, Atziluth, respectively. Quote, the re-entry of these twin spouses into the womb of the mother is the initiation described in Liber 418, which gives admission to the inmost court of the AA. Of the last step we cannot speak, end quote. This last step being beyond Keter has no description because to label it will cause it to have an opposite, and since everything there is in perfect unity, no term can be put to it. Quote, it will now be recognized that to devise a practical magical ceremony to correspond to Tetragrammaton in this exalted sense might be difficult if not impossible. In such a ceremony, the rituals of purification alone might occupy many incarnations, end quote. You would have to perform something so intricate and perfect that it encompassed all of the 4 worlds, and by the end, pushed on into the divine light. Quote, it will be necessary, therefore, to revert to the simpler view of Tetragrammaton, remembering only that the He final is the throne of the spirit, of the Shin of Pentagrammaton, end quote. This allows us to focus on the heart Tefereth, and the HGA instead of the highest. But the highest is implied as Malkuth is in Keter, so the spirit is ever present throughout all things and can be grasped more readily. Quote, the Yod will represent a swift and violent creative energy. Following this will be a calmer and more reflective but even more powerful flow of will, the irresistible force of a mighty river. This state of mind will be followed by an expansion of the consciousness. It will penetrate all space, and this will finally undergo a crystallization, resplendent with interior light. Such modifications of the original will may be observed in the course of the invocations when they are properly performed, end quote. Basically, one stage leads to the next. A forceful declaration of your will and what the invocation seeks to accomplish. The will begins to flow forward, perhaps images and descriptions are conjured. The will has begun to cause effect, and the invocation expands the consciousness to the sphere of intent or the deity, and finally union is achieved. And this is from the end of the chapter, quote, "In the expression which will be used in chapter 15, inflame thyself, etc., only the first stage is specified. But if that is properly done, the other stages will follow as if by necessity," end quote. So it ends like I began earlier on. If the Yod phase is properly performed, the seed will be cast forth and come to fruition. Love is the law, love under will. I'll see you in the next one.